Well, it's time for the rigs and techniques here at the Parts View Workbench. You know, Dave, getting jiggy with a crappie is something they like to do in Texas.
Yeah, they do. You know, they're one of the most pursued species in Texas, you know, probably just as much as bass. People fish for crappie because they're really good to eat. You know, you can go out, you can catch, you know, Texas allows you to keep 25 per person.
Ooh.
So, you know, and they got to be a minimum of 10 inches, and they got plenty of crappie that are over 10 inches. So, you know, it's a great way to, you know, get a big cooler full of food, you know, and you really don't have to, you know, probably a minnow is probably the best way to catch them if you want to keep some minnows on the boat. But if you don't want to bother with all that hassle of keeping minnows alive and clean, and you want to keep your boat cleaner, you know, jigs work just as well a lot of times, sometimes better. Sometimes you'll be fishing in a spot with one guy with minnows, another guy with jigs. The jig guy's catching them all, the minnow guy's not getting a bite. Goes vice versa, it goes back and forth. But, you know, during the spring and fall, you know, the crappie are in a transitional period. Like right now, they're pretty much, you know, done with most of the stuff inshore, and as it starts to heat up, they go and try to find deeper water and, you know, more of a stable temperature. So you can use your sonar to find these, you know, these groups of fish. They'll group up, and they really like to group up on a horizontal. If you find a horizontal something, a tree, something, anything that's like horizontal up off the bottom that has a little slant to it, boy, they'll get all over that.
They like that.
And yeah, and brush piles, I like brush piles, docks, and air, you know, areas around docks, lily pads, any kind of structure will hold them. But you know, most of the ones you'll find in Texas are around, you know, trees. You know, and you'll come up on a tree, and sometimes, you know, if you've got the live scope, you can see, you know, it looks like the whole top of the tree is alive. You know, it's like it's blowing in the wind because they're all top, you know, at the top of it. And what you want to do is you want to drop your jig down there, you know, and try not to, you know, you want to get a little ways off the school. You know, you can vertical jig, but you don't want to be right on top of them. You want to be, you know, 8 feet or so away from them, so you can, you know, use one of these long crappie rods and get your jig out and have it just come down, and you want it to stop right above where you're marking the fish. Because, you know, crappie aren't going to go down to get something. They're going to come up. They'll come up to eat it, but they won't go down to get it. So you want to keep most of your baits above the school.
Right.
And that's what's so great about these crappie rods. You know, they're really long. They're very sensitive.
Right.
And just you holding it, you know, that little tail will jiggle in the water. Mm-hmm. You know, and that's the kind of the baits that you want to use when you're using these kind of rods.
Right.
Because you're not really casting and retrieving.
Right.
You know, you're pretty much just dropping it. It's pretty much like using a bamboo pole.
Right.
You know, that little reel on there isn't made to fight the fish. It's just to hold the line.
Right.
And you pretty much fight the fish with the rod.
Right. Right.
Now, when you're using one of these other baits without, you know, that instead of that tiny shad, if you're using one with a little spinner on it or something like that.
They call these hair jigs.
That's a hair jig, or anything with a spinner or a curly tail. We got some of the ones down there with a curly tail.
Okay.
You're going to be casting those and then reeling them back over the top of the school, right? Over the top of the school, too. You don't want to go through the middle of it, and you don't want to go underneath of it. You want to go over the top of it. And these are the kind of jigs that you'll be wanting to troll as well. You know, a lot of guys will use a spider rig where they'll have 6 to 12 rods sticking out of the front of the boat, and each one of them's got a little jig like that, and it's you know, between 8, you know, to 15 feet, you know, depending on where you're marking the fish, and you'll just troll along and, you know, use those at different depths and try to locate those fish, and they'll hopefully come up and eat your jig.
Boy, Bass Assassin makes some really cool crappie
dappers. All the little panfish assassin.
They look just like
the little dappers and the tiny shads as well. Are really cool. Not only that, you can use a bobber. You know, they were talking earlier tonight about using a bobber rig. Mm-hmm. And if you use a bobber stopper, it allows you to set that thing up perfectly You know, I've got it really shallow right now so that we could show it better.
Right.
But what happens is you know, you'll make that cast out there with that jig, and you'll have this little bobber stopper, you know, 10 or 15 feet up,
right,
wherever, you know, you're marking the fish. And that bobber will come right up to the top and stop. And now your bait's working, jubilating down there in the spot where you want it to be.
Oh no!
Underneath the bobber. I said jubilate. I said
Oh
your word.
no! He using a Rickism over here at the workbench.
man. Now
That's
you're talking,
my Memorial Day surprise.
There you
you're
go.
talking Rick's
Jubilate.
language. Jubilating gentleman over there.